I woke up to the sound of thoughts that weren't mine. At first, I thought it was the hospital monitors glitching, the beeping somehow whispering words. But no, the voice was clear, steady, and very much alive. God, please don't let him die. Can't lose him. Not him. I turned my head, pain shot through my skull like lightning, and saw him. Evan, my best friend since high school, sitting beside my hospital bed, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. I blinked once, twice. Then the whisper came again. If he wakes up, I'll tell him. Screw the consequences. My breath caught. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Tell me what, Evan? He looked up just then and our eyes met. He smiled shakily. That same smile that had always calmed me down, the one that said everything would be fine, even when it wasn't. Hey, you're awake, he said softly. You scared the hell out of me, man. I tried to smile back, but my mind was spinning. I could hear him, his thoughts, and what I heard didn't sound like something a friend would say. 2 days earlier, I'd been the one behind the wheel. Rain-slick roads, headlights blurring, the world spinning. We were driving back from a late movie, laughing about how cliché horror films had gotten. Then screeching tires, a deer darting across, the crunch of metal. When I came to, there was smoke, the smell of gasoline, and Evan's arms around me. He dragged me out of the car before it exploded. The last thing I remembered was his voice shouting my name. Now, lying in the sterile white of St. Joseph's Hospital, I felt like a ghost haunting my own body and my best friend's heart. The doctors said I'd hit my head hard. Concussion, they called it. But concussions don't make you hear thoughts. I tried to tell myself it was just stress or medication, but every time someone entered the room, their inner voice came flooding in like a radio signal I couldn't turn off. The nurse, he's kinda cute for a head trauma case. The doctor, if his MRI comes back clean, he's lucky. Evan, I should have told him years ago. My pulse quickened. I turned to look at him again. He was sitting in that uncomfortable plastic chair, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, pretending not to notice me watching. But his thoughts betrayed him. He'll never look at me the same way. I'm such an idiot. I swallowed hard. What the hell was going on? Over the next few days, I learned to control it, sort of. The thoughts came in bursts, like waves, some clear, some faint. I couldn't read everyone all the time, but when I focused on someone, it was like tuning into their frequency. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Instead, I watched, listened, learned. I found out that Nurse Kelly was cheating on her boyfriend with a resident. That Dr. Patel hated his job. That my mother still blamed herself for my father leaving. And that Evan, the one constant in my life, was hiding something big. He visited every day. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes jokes, sometimes just silence. But no matter what he did, his thoughts kept circling the same center, me. He doesn't know. He can't know. He'll hate me if he finds out. I wanted to shout, find out what? But instead I played along. So, I said one evening, when the sun was bleeding orange through the blinds, you've been here a lot. Don't you have work? He shrugged. Took some time off. You almost died, Jake. You think I'd just go to the office? I laughed weakly. I mean, someone's got to pay rent. He smiled, but his eyes didn't match. If only he knew how much I'd give up for him. My chest tightened. Something inside me, something that had always been there but buried under jokes, years, and denial, began to stir. The night before I was discharged, I woke up to find him asleep in the chair, head tilted, breathing slow. The hospital lights cast long shadows across his face. I'd never really looked at him before, not like this. He was handsome, yeah, but that wasn't it. There was something raw in the way he carried worry. How his jaw tensed even in sleep. How his hand twitched as if reaching for me. And then I heard it again. Soft. Vulnerable. If he could hear me, I'd tell him I love him. My heart stopped. Because in that moment, I realized I could hear him. And I didn't know if I wanted him to stop. The next morning, I was discharged. The world outside felt too bright, too loud, too full of thoughts. Evan helped me into his car, careful as if I might break. We drove in silence for a while, the radio playing some country song about lost love and found hope. Fitting, really. I watched him from the passenger seat. His profile, his hands on the wheel, the faint scar near his wrist from when we were 12 and he fell off his bike. "Don't look at him like that," his mind whispered, almost pleading. "You'll make me think it means something." I looked away, but it did mean something. Back home, everything felt foreign. The apartment we shared messy, loud, full of memories now buzzed with unspoken words. He cooked dinner, trying to act normal. I tried to eat, pretending I couldn't hear the storm inside his head. But then he dropped a plate. The sound shattered through the silence, and so did his thoughts. "I can't do this anymore." I froze. "Do what?" He looked at me, startled. "What?" "You just said I stopped myself." No, couldn't tell him. Not yet. He frowned. "Jake, you okay?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just headache." He sighed, kneeling to pick up the broken pieces. "Headache or not, you're terrible at lying." I smiled despite myself. "Guess you know me too well." If only he knew how literally true that was now. Days passed. Weeks. I tried to live normally, to drown out the noise of everyone's thoughts. But Evan's mind, his voice always cut through the static. It wasn't just affection. It was guilt, fear, regret, and something deeper that scared me more than the accident ever did. One night, after a few too many beers and a failed attempt to ignore the tension, I blurted, "You've been weird lately." He laughed, but it was hollow. "Weird? You're the one who almost died and started staring into space like a ghost." "Yeah, but you," I stopped. The words in my throat tangled with his unspoken ones. "Don't say it. Please don't say it." "Never mind," I muttered. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "Jake, if I tell you something, promise you won't hate me." My pulse jumped. "Why would I hate you?" He hesitated. "Because it's about you." And before I could stop myself, I whispered, "I already know." He froze. "What do you mean, you know?" My mouth went dry. I couldn't tell him about the voices, about hearing everything he thought. So I lied. "I just figured it out," I said. "The way you look at me, the things you say." Silence. Then softly, "Then you know I don't." My voice cracked. "Just don't." Because the truth was, I didn't know what to do with it. With him. With me. He stared at me, eyes raw, jaw tight. "Right," he said finally, voice breaking. "Forget I said anything." And he left. The moment the door closed, the silence screamed louder than any thought I'd ever heard. For the first time since the accident, I wanted the voices back. At least then I'd still hear him. The days after Evan left felt like walking through fog. I went to work, I spoke to people, I even laughed when I was supposed to. But the truth was, I didn't hear anything anymore, not their voices, not their thoughts, just silence. Maybe it was relief, maybe punishment. All I knew was that the noise was gone, and so was he. It had been a week since that night. I'd replayed it 100 times, the look in his eyes, the way his words trembled before he swallowed them back. I'd thought I wanted silence, but the absence of his thoughts was worse than the chaos. At least when I heard him, I knew he was still there. Now I was alone with my own thoughts, and that, it turned out, was far louder than anything else. My mother came by that Sunday, bringing soup and concern like she always did. She fussed over the bandages I no longer needed, clucked her tongue at the dishes piled in the sink. "You should call him," she said finally. "Who?" I asked, even though I knew. "Evan. He called me twice after the accident, just to ask how you were doing." "Sweet boy, that one." I nodded, staring into my bowl. She reached out, resting her hand over mine. "Whatever happened between you two, don't let it break what you had. People like that, they don't come often." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that things were too complicated, too heavy, too strange. But instead, I just said, "I'll try." That night, I dreamed of the crash again. The headlights, the deer, the rain. But this time, when I woke up gasping, it wasn't the accident that terrified me. It was the realization that I didn't just miss my friend, I missed feeling connected. The ability to hear others' thoughts had been overwhelming, yes, but it had also stripped away pretense. For the first time, I had known what people truly felt. Their fears, their kindness, their secrets. Without that, everyone felt like strangers again. I found myself standing outside Evan's apartment 2 days later. It wasn't planned. I'd just been walking through streets soaked in November drizzle and somehow ended up there. The lights inside were off, but his old truck was parked out front. Mud splattered on the tires. He was home. I hesitated at the door, rehearsing what to say. "Hey, I'm sorry I made things weird." Or maybe, "Thanks for saving my life." Or maybe nothing at all. Before I could knock, the door opened. He looked surprised but not angry, just tired. "Jake," he said quietly, "what are you doing here?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I just needed to talk." He stepped aside, letting me in. The place was dim, warm, and cluttered in the way that made it feel like in books everywhere. Mugs half full, guitar by the couch. We stood there for a long time, not speaking. Then, softly, he said, "You look better." "Thanks," I said. "You don't." That earned a small laugh. It wasn't much, but it was enough to break the ice. We sat, talked, about everything but that. Work, weather, football. The usual things people say when they're afraid to say what matters. Then, somewhere between awkward pauses, I said, "I lost it." He frowned. "Lost what?" "The noise," I said. "After the accident, I could hear things, people, their thoughts, and now it's gone." He stared at me for a long time, not laughing, not questioning my sanity, just listening. "I believe you," he said finally. I blinked. "You do," he shrugged. "After what happened, I'd believe almost anything. You nearly died, Jake. Maybe something in you changed." "Yeah," I whispered. "Something did." The room went quiet again. Then Evan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. "You said you knew," he murmured. "That night. What did you mean by that?" I hesitated. "You were thinking something. About me. About us. And I heard it." He went still. I continued. "You said if I woke up, you'd tell me something. And later, you almost did." Evan exhaled slowly, like letting out years of breath he'd been holding. "Yeah," he said. "I did." His voice cracked just slightly. "But it's not something I wanted to drop on you after you nearly got killed. You've had enough to deal with." I looked at him, and for once, I didn't need the gift to know what he meant. "Evan," I said quietly, "you've been there for me since forever. When my dad left, when I failed out of college the first time, when I was broke. You didn't have to explain anything then. You just stayed." He smiled faintly. "That's what friends do." "Yeah," I said, "but not everyone would." He looked up, and in that moment, I saw the truth in his eyes, the weight, the care, the guilt. And something inside me broke open, not in fear, but understanding. We didn't speak for a while. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of all the things neither of us had known how to say. Finally, I said, "You saved my life, Evan. I don't think I ever said thank you." He gave a small laugh. "You did. You just don't remember. You were half conscious, bleeding, and you said, 'You always get the last word.'" I smiled. "Sounds like me." "Yeah," he said, his voice soft. "It does." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "You know, when I pulled you out of that car, I thought, that was it. That if you didn't make it, I'd never forgive myself. And when you did, I just didn't know what to do with all that." "With what?" "Fear, relief, gratitude." He met my eyes. Everything all at once. There was something different about the way he said it, not confessional, not dramatic, just honest. And for the first time, I realized how heavy it must have been for him. Not just the accident, but carrying emotions too deep for words. Maybe that was what my strange gift had been, for not to spy, not to know secrets, but to understand. To really hear someone, even when they couldn't say it aloud. When I left that night, the rain had stopped. The air was cold but clean, and for the first time in weeks, My head was quiet in a peaceful way. Evan walked me to the car. "You sure you're okay to drive?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally am." He nodded, hands in his pockets. "Good. I hate hospitals." "Me too." We both smiled. Then he said, "Hey Jake." "Yeah. If it ever comes back the thing where you can hear people, maybe don't listen to me next time." I laughed. "No promises." He rolled his eyes. "Figures." But there was warmth in his voice. Weeks passed. The voices never returned, but something else did ease. We fell back into our rhythm, our quiet chaos, the way friends do when they've survived something together. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me across the table, like he was checking I was still really there. Sometimes I'd do the same. We didn't talk about the accident anymore, or what came after. We didn't need to. Some things I'd learned didn't need to be spoken to be heard. It wasn't until months later, when winter rolled in, that I realized how much we'd both changed. I was walking home from work one evening, snow starting to fall, when a woman slipped on the sidewalk ahead of me. I rushed over to help her, instinctively reaching out, and for the briefest second, I heard it again. "Please, just let me be okay." Her thought raw and desperate. Then it was gone. But it left me smiling because it wasn't a curse. It was a gift, a reminder of how fragile and miraculous people were. And maybe, just maybe, the reason I'd been given it in the first place was to learn how to listen. That night I told Evan. He didn't look surprised. "Of course it came back," he said, smirking. "You never really stopped talking, even in your head." I threw a cushion at him. "You're hilarious." He caught it, laughing, a sound so genuine it filled the room. And for a moment I thought maybe this was what peace felt like. Not perfection, not answers, just presence. The ability to sit beside someone who knew your worst days and stayed anyway. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear echoes, maybe real, maybe imagined, of thoughts not my own. But they don't scare me anymore, because I know that what we hear, what we feel, what connects us, it's all part of being human. And if I ever start to doubt that again, I just think of him, the friend who stayed, the silence that healed, and the accident that taught me how to really listen. Winter melted slowly into spring. The snow on the sidewalks turned into slush, the kind that ruined your shoes but promised something better underneath. Life went back to being ordinary, the kind of ordinary that used to bore me. But now I found comfort in it. For the first time in a long while, silence felt like peace instead of punishment. Evan and I settled into a rhythm again. We still argued about small things: who forgot to buy milk, who left the lights on, but underneath it all was an unspoken understanding. We'd been through hell and we'd made it out. Together. Some nights, we'd sit out on the old fire escape with a couple of beers, watching the city breathe beneath us. He'd tell me about work, about how his boss was a jerk, and I'd tell him about how my job still didn't make sense. The conversation would drift, fade, then settle into a silence that didn't need filling. Because sometimes the best conversations aren't the ones we say out loud. One evening, as the sunset spilled gold across the sky, Evan said, "You ever think about what happened? The accident, I mean." "All the time," I admitted. "I think about how close I was to losing everything. You, my mom, my life." "Scary." He nodded, sipping his beer. "Yeah, scary's one word for it." "What would you call it?" "Wake-up call," he said simply. We go through life thinking we have time to fix things, to say things. Then something happens and you realize, maybe you don't. I looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw not the boy who'd always been there, but the man who had stayed even when it hurt. "Yeah," I said softly. "You're right." The next week, I decided to see a therapist. Not because of the voices, those had been gone for months, but because I realized how much I'd buried before the accident. The fear, the guilt, the way I'd treated life like a checklist instead of a chance. Dr. Lewis was kind. He didn't question the impossible, he just listened. When I told him about hearing thoughts, he said something that stuck with me. "Maybe that wasn't a literal power, Jake. Maybe it was your mind forcing you to confront what you'd ignored. The truth is, we all hear people if we really pay attention." That night, I wrote those words down. Maybe the voices were gone because I'd finally learned how to listen the normal way. Months passed. I started running again, cooking, seeing my mom more often. I even went back to night classes, something I'd abandoned years ago. Evan was still there, of course. Always around, always dependable. He'd tease me about my terrible cooking. I'd mock his old truck. And somehow, it felt like the universe had balanced itself again. But something inside me had shifted. The accident had taken away a part of me, the recklessness, the noise, and left behind something quieter, stronger. Maybe survival wasn't about going back to who you were. Maybe it was about becoming someone new. One night in late April, a storm rolled in, the kind that rattled windows and drenched the streets in silver light. Power flickered, thunder rolled, and I found myself standing on the balcony, watching the rain. Evan joined me, handing me a blanket. "Déjà vu," I said, smiling faintly. "Feels like that night." "Yeah," he said. "Except this time, no one's crashing a car." "Small improvement," I joked. We stood there for a while, listening to the rain beat against the railing. Then he said, "You ever wonder why it happened to you? The whole hearing thoughts thing." I thought about it. "I used to think it was punishment," I said, "for taking things for granted, for not paying attention. But now, I think it was a lesson." "What kind of lesson?" "That everyone's fighting something, even the people who look fine." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, you can't always tell what someone's carrying." "Exactly," I said. "And maybe we're not supposed to fix people. Just listen." He smiled, small, real. "You've gotten wiser since you hit your head. Or maybe I just started using it." I shot back, grinning. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that somehow made the storm quieter. After that night, things kept moving. Life didn't freeze for either of us, it rarely does. He got promoted. I finally finished my degree. But through it all, there was a thread, invisible, steady, tying us together. A reminder that some bonds aren't about how long you've known someone, but about what you've survived together. In late summer, my mom invited both of us to dinner. She made too much food, as usual, and fussed over Evan like he was her second son. At one point, as we sat around the table, she said, "You boys have been through so much. You remind me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up." Evan and I exchanged a look, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. She was right. That night, after dinner, as we walked to the car, the sky was full of stars, clear, endless, and so impossibly calm. Evan looked up. "You ever think about how small we are?" "All the time," I said. "But somehow that makes it better. Means we can start over, no matter how many times we mess up." He smiled, glancing at me. "You really did change." I shrugged. "Maybe I just woke up." Fall came again. The city glowed with red leaves and fading sunlight, the same way it had the year before. Except now, when I heard voices, real, spoken ones, I actually listened. The world felt louder, fuller, but in a good way. Every sound mattered. Laughter, footsteps, music drifting from an open cafe window. Even silence had meaning now. One afternoon, I found myself driving past the stretch of road where it had happened, the crash. The guardrail had been replaced, the asphalt smooth and unscarred. If you didn't know what had happened, you'd think it was just another bend in the road. I pulled over, engine idling, and sat there for a while. The memory hit, the spin, the scream, the darkness, but it didn't hurt anymore. Instead, it felt like watching someone else's story. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular. Maybe to fate. Maybe to the lesson. Maybe to the part of me that survived. And for the briefest second, I thought I heard something, not a voice, exactly, but a feeling. Warm, steady, peaceful. Maybe it was just the wind. Or maybe it was the universe whispering back. That night, I told Evan I'd gone there. "You went back?" he asked, surprised. "Yeah, I think I needed to close it." He nodded. "You think it's really over?" I thought for a moment. "No, I think it's part of me now. But that's okay. It doesn't hurt to remember, it hurts to stay stuck." He smiled. "Look at you. Quoting therapy sessions like a pro." "Hey, I said, laughing. It's cheaper than crashing another car. The seasons kept turning. We moved to a new apartment, closer to the city, with more light and a tiny balcony that overlooked the skyline. Sometimes I'd wake early, make coffee, and watch the sunrise paint the buildings gold. And every now and then, when the world was quiet enough, I'd think I heard something again, faint, like an echo in another room. Not words, not thoughts, just connection. And I realized then that maybe that's what the voices had always been, not magic, not madness, but empathy. The human kind. A year after the accident, we drove out to the coast. The ocean stretched wide and endless, waves crashing like the heartbeat of something ancient. Evan leaned on the railing, wind in his hair. Hard to believe it's been a year. Yeah, I said, watching the horizon. Feels longer. Feels better. He looked at me. You regret anything? I thought about it. The fear, the confusion, the months of silence. Then I shook my head. No, if it hadn't happened, I'd still be half asleep. I'd still be missing everything right in front of me. He smiled. Guess some crashes are worth surviving. Yeah, I said quietly. They are. The sun dipped low, bleeding gold across the water. And for a moment, standing there beside the person who had seen me at my worst and never left, I understood something simple but true. We don't need to hear people's thoughts to understand them. We just need to be willing to stay. Months later, I wrote down everything that had happened, not as proof, but as memory. On the last page, I wrote, after the accident, I thought the gift was hearing people's thoughts. But the real gift was learning to listen to others, to silence, and to myself. And I meant every word. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.